The U.S. Attorney in Delaware in our investigation was constantly hamstrung, limited, and marginalized by DOJ officials as well as other U.S. attorneys.
Assistant United States Attorney Leslie Wolf cited the optics of executing a search warrant at President Biden's residence as a deciding factor for not allowing it. Prosecutors instructed investigators not to ask about the big guy or dad when conducting interviews.
That's right. The big guy was off limits. That was the takeaway from IRS whistleblowers Gary Shapley and Joseph Ziegler during their bombshell testimony before the House Oversight Committee on Wednesday. Their testimony unfolding as evidence of a multi-million-dollar bribery scheme involving the president in the form of the FBI's 1023 form were made public this week. To bring us up to date on the Biden corruption investigations, we are joined now by Republican Congressman from the state of Wisconsin and member of the House Oversight Committee, Glen Grothman. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us. During more than 4 hours of testimony, the two whistleblowers painted a pretty clear picture of obstruction and interference into the Hunter Biden probe by the Biden Department of Justice. Now, for the public, what do you think was the most important aspect of the information that they provided? What did you learn, and what did the public learn this week that perhaps they hadn't heard before, they didn't know before?
Well, I think the degree to which the Department of Justice, which should be searching out wrongdoing, instead weighed in to prevent finding out about wrongdoing. You know, during the 2.5 months between when Joe Biden was elected and he took office, President Trump was still the president. There was supposed to be a day of action in which they were supposed to interview 12 people. They only wound up interviewing one person. Repeatedly over the 4 years before that, the IRS was stymied in its ability to gather more information, and eventually the charges that Hunter Biden had to stand for there were nowhere near what they should have. So in so many ways, we've got a problem in the Department of Justice, which we've seen before. The Department of Justice has become politicized, and it seems like their major goal throughout this thing was to protect Hunter Biden and even more protect Joe Biden.
Yeah, one of the things that stood out to me, Congressman, in particular, was this line of questioning from Congressman Jason Smith over the exclusion of the Biden grandchildren from the investigation by the Department of Justice. Watch this.
You also testified that Assistant United States Attorney Leslie Wolf told you that you would get into hot water if interviewed the president's grandchildren.
In this case, we needed to talk to witnesses related to things that were deducted on the tax return. And in this case, it was the adult children that we needed to talk to.
Congressman, talk to us about why the grandchildren are relevant here.
Well, of course, you have 9 different Biden family members who were getting money during this time period. It's important to find out what they were getting as far as tracking down who should report the income and, you know, who was winding up getting a deduction for having this money flow to the grandchildren. I think the reason the IRS was they try to stamp down on them from having this coming out is obviously the more information like this that comes out, the more it's apparent that the whole Biden family is a little bit corrupt here or making money off of Joe's position.
Yeah, and if you tried to deduct the costs for hookers and whatnot from your tax return, you'd probably be going to jail if you were a normal person, but apparently that doesn't happen to the Biden family. As I mentioned, the full FBI 1023 informant document was released this week by Senator Chuck Grassley against the wishes of the FBI. In it, a Burisma business executive claimed that his dog was smarter than Hunter Biden and that Hunter was only hired to protect them through his father. The informant's report also claimed the executive was coerced to pay the Bidens for their services. This, of course, directly contradicts the president's claim he never spoke to his son or had anything to do with his overseas business dealings. So we're now seeing direct evidence of bribery. What's the next step here, Congressman?
Well, we have a new tranche of bank records that we're going to have to go through, see if there can be more interviews with people other than just this confidential witness. You're right. It was absolutely devastating testimony. And if true, allegations that it cost $5 million to buy Hunter, $5 million to buy Joe is, that would be just as devastating as can be with regard to Joe Biden. But we'd like to get more information. And like I said, we'd like to see where the money is being transferred from. These people have bragged that there's so many different places to put the money. We aren't going to catch them, but we'll find out about that.
Congressman, real quick, are we going to see a list of acceptable prosecutors from Republicans in Congress to the Department of Justice and a formal demand that a separate independent investigation into this be contemplated?
We'll certainly demand a separate investigation. As you can see right now, you just cannot trust the Department of Justice. And I want to say, by the way, that the staff in both the Senate and the House has done a tremendous job. I mean, we talk about being outgunned.
Yeah.
If the Department of Justice were on the ball, they would have perhaps hundreds of people investigating this. Instead, we have a handful of staffers in the
Well,
House.
they certainly did that for former President Trump. Congressman Glen Grothman, thank you very much for bringing us up to speed. We appreciate that.